In the 20th century in Vietnam, there existed a prison known as Hell on Earth. Built by the French colonial regime, its purpose was simple and ruthless: to break the fighting spirit of the Vietnamese people. This was not a place meant to hold bodies. It was designed to crush will, erase resistance, and silence a nation. The island with no return. Not every prison needs high walls, and not every sentence is delivered in a courtroom. In the middle of the East Sea, more than 230 kilometers from the mainland, lies an island chain once labeled by the French with a cold, lifeless name, Poulo Condore. To them, it was just a dot on the colonial map. To tens of thousands of Vietnamese, it marked the end of youth, of freedom, and often of life itself. In 1862, after the Nguy Letter 1EC5N Court was forced to sign the Treaty of Nha Tuat, 3 eastern provinces of southern Vietnam fell under French control. That same year, the French officially transformed Con Dao into the largest political prison in all of Indochina. No barbed wire was necessary. No towering watchtowers were required. The vast ocean surrounding the island became a natural wall of permanent confinement. From the very beginning, Con Dao was not built to reform human beings. It was designed to break them. A sentence with no release date. Most prisoners sent to Con Dao never knew when or if they would leave. They were sentenced to exile, a deliberately vague punishment in the French colonial legal system. A person could be sent to the island for joining a labor strike, distributing leaflets, teaching the Vietnamese language, or simply being suspected of anti-French ideas. No clear evidence was required. Only the label, dangerous to colonial order. The journey from Saigon to Con Dao took several days by ship. Prisoners were shackled, locked in cargo holds, deprived of air and drinking water. Many died at sea before ever setting foot on the island. Those who survived understood one thing immediately. Once you arrive at Con Dao, you either lose your mind or you become someone else. Architecture of cruelty. Con Dao was not a single prison. It was an entire system: Phu Hai, Phu Sun, Phu Tho, Phu Bin camps. Each compound functioned as a machine built to grind human beings down. Collective cells were cramped, with low ceilings and no windows. Dozens of prisoners were shackled together to a single iron bar, unable to fully extend their legs. The air was thick with sweat, blood, human waste, and disease. By day, prisoners were dragged out for forced labor, breaking stone, building roads, hauling coral under the burning tropical sun. At night, they returned to their cells like shadows of men. No medicine, no medical care. Death from malaria, dysentery, or tuberculosis was routine. But the true hell had not yet revealed itself. Tiger cages where men were turned into experiments. The French called them cages à tigers, tiger cages. The name itself sounded like a sick joke. In reality, these were roofless cells, barely a few square meters wide. Prisoners were locked inside under the open tropical sun, completely exposed. They were shackled hand and foot, starved for days, covered with lime powder, beaten from above as guards walked across iron grates, prodding them like animals. No interrogation was required. No new sentence was issued. All it took was being labeled uncooperative. Inside the tiger cages, time ceased to exist. One day felt like a year, and many never walked out on their own legs. But Con Dao did not produce fear alone. What the French never anticipated was this: Con Dao did not destroy resistance. It forged it. Behind stone walls, beneath chains and darkness, something else was quietly taking shape: revolutionary. Prisoners secretly taught one another to read and write, passed knowledge by word of mouth, organized political discussions, maintained discipline and faith as a matter of survival. Con Dao became an underground school of revolution, a place where everything was stripped away from a person except belief. Con Dao was not the only place where the French imprisoned the Vietnamese, but it was the place they believed no one could ever resist them. And it was here, where men labeled as already dead, quietly prepared for a future that France would never be able to control. Men in chains, minds unbroken. They arrived in chains, but chains were never enough. At Con Dao, the French believed physical suffering would erase resistance. They believed hunger, isolation, and pain would reduce men to obedience. What they failed to understand was this: resistance does not begin in the body. It begins in the mind. STRIPPEDOF, everything except identity. The moment prisoners stepped onto the island, their names disappeared. They were issued numbers. Their clothes were replaced with coarse uniforms. Personal belongings were confiscated. Hair was shaved. Heads were lowered. The goal was simple: erase the individual. But identity does not vanish so easily. In the crowded cells of Fuhai and Fusun, men learned to recognize one another not by names, but by whispers, scars, accents, and memories of villages left behind. A former teacher from the north. A dock worker from Saigon. A farmer who had never held a book, now sharing a cell with intellectuals and organizers. Con Dao forced them together. And in doing so, it created something the French never intended: unity. The silent language of survival. Talking was dangerous. Listening was mandatory. Guards patrolled constantly. Punishment for organizing was immediate and brutal. So prisoners adapted. They developed silent systems. Tapping codes on walls. Coughing patterns to signal danger. Scraps of charcoal used to write lessons on stone, erased before dawn. Education continued in fragments. A sentence remembered from a banned book. A lesson whispered at night. A political idea passed like contraband. Knowledge became currency. Memory became weapon. Discipline under hell. Unlike common prisons, Con Dao held a high concentration of political prisoners. Many were already organized before their arrest. Inside the cells they maintained structure. Senior prisoners protected the weak. Food was shared. Discipline was enforced from within. This internal order was not imposed by guards. It was created by prisoners who understood one truth. Survival alone was not enough. They had to survive with purpose. When someone collapsed from hunger, others carried them. When someone lost hope, others reminded them why they were there. Con Dao punished weakness. The prisoners answered with solidarity. When death was no longer feared, the French relied on one ultimate weapon: fear. Executions, public beatings, tiger cages. But over time, fear lost its power. Men who had watched friends die of disease and torture stopped fearing death. What they feared instead was dying without meaning. This shift terrified the guards more than rebellion ever could. A man who fears death can be controlled. A man who has accepted it cannot. Humiliation as policy. The cruelty at Con Dao was not random. It was systematic. Guards used humiliation deliberately, forcing prisoners to crawl, denying them the right to stand upright, mocking them as animals. The goal was not just pain. It was dehumanization. Yet humiliation failed. Because dignity, once internalized, does not depend on posture or chains. Prisoners resisted in small ways. Standing straight when beaten. Refusing to beg. Maintaining rituals of respect among themselves. In hell, dignity became an act of defiance. Humiliation as policy. The cruelty at Con Dao was not random. It was systematic. Guards used humiliation deliberately, forcing prisoners to crawl, denying them the right to stand upright, mocking them as animals. The goal was not just pain. It was dehumanization. Yet humiliation failed. Because dignity, once internalized, does not depend on posture or chains. Prisoners resisted in small ways. Standing straight when beaten. Refusing to beg. Maintaining rituals of respect among themselves. In hell, dignity became an act of defiance. The French believed Con Dao was a place where movements went to die. What they never realized was this. Every chain forged resolve. Every punishment sharpened belief. And somewhere inside those stone walls, a generation of men was learning how to endure anything. Tiger cages, when cruelty became a system. Cruelty when improvised is chaos. Cruelty when repeated becomes habit. But cruelty when designed, recorded, and enforced becomes a system. At Con Dao, the tiger cages were not accidents. They were not excesses committed by rogue guards. They were policy. Designed to be seen, designed to be felt. The tiger cages were built above ground level. Guards walked on iron grates overhead. Prisoners lay beneath them, exposed, immobile, powerless. This architecture served a purpose. Pain was not hidden. Pain was displayed. Guards could look down and observe the effects. Bodies shrinking from starvation. Skin blistering under the sun. Eyes losing focus. Punishment became surveillance. Suffering became measurable. In colonial reports, the cages were described as disciplinary units. In reality, they were human laboratories. The science of degradation. Every element of the tiger cages was calculated. No roof. So the sun could burn flesh during the day, and rain could soak wounds at night. No space to stand. So muscles would weaken. So posture would collapse. So dignity would erode. Minimal food. Not enough to die quickly, but enough to prolong suffering. Lime powder. Thrown onto open wounds. To intensify pain. And prevent healing. This was not punishment meant to end resistance. It was punishment meant to outlast it. Confessions without questions. Inside the tiger cages, interrogation was unnecessary. The French had already decided guilt. There were no questions to answer. No statements to sign. No chance for appeal. The cages existed to send a message to others. This is what happens when you do not submit. But the message did not land as intended. Instead of fear, the cages produced something else, clarity. Men inside them understood with absolute certainty that survival depended not on obedience, but on endurance. The limits the human body. The human body has thresholds. Beyond a certain point, pain no longer shocks. Hunger no longer surprises. Fear no longer escalates. In the cages, prisoners crossed those thresholds. Some hallucinated. Some lost the ability to speak. Some stopped reacting entirely. To the guards, this looked like victory. To the prisoners, it was adaptation. A body that no longer reacts. Cannot be controlled by pain. Death as administrative error. Deaths in the tiger cages were rarely recorded as executions. They were labeled illness, weakness, failure to endure discipline. Paperwork mattered more than bodies. When a prisoner died, the system adjusted. Food rations recalculated. Cell space reassigned. The next body moved in. The machine did not stop. And yet the system had one flaw it could never correct. Witnessing resistance. Every man placed in a tiger cage was seen by others. From nearby cells, prisoners heard screams. They saw shadows collapse. They counted the days until a body stopped moving. This witnessing created memory. And memory, unlike flesh, does not decay. Names were remembered. Faces reconstructed in the mind. Stories preserved in whispers. The French controlled the present. But the prisoners were quietly preserving the future. When the world finally looked in. For decades, the tiger cages remained hidden. Remote island. Restricted access. Colonial silence. Then much later, the outside world finally saw them. Foreign journalists, diplomats, investigators walked above the grates. They looked down. What they saw was not just physical suffering, but a system that had normalized it. By then, the cages had already done their damage. Not only to prisoners, but to the moral authority of colonial rule itself. The paradox of terror. The French believed terror was sustainable. That fear, once established, would maintain order indefinitely. But terror has a paradox. It demands constant escalation. Each punishment must be harsher than the last. Each warning must be louder. Each example more extreme. Eventually, there is nowhere left to go. At Con Dao, the tiger cages were the end point. And once reached, they exposed the truth. If this was the best the system could do, then the system was already failing. The tiger cages were meant to erase resistance through suffering. Instead, they documented its limits. They proved that pain has a ceiling, that terror exhausts itself, and that systems built on cruelty eventually reveal their own weakness. Because when oppression becomes this visible, this deliberate, this undeniable, it no longer looks like order. It looks like fear. The secret school of revolution. Prisons are designed to isolate. Con Dao did the opposite. By forcing together the most determined opponents of colonial rule, the island became an unintended experiment, one that transformed confinement into education, where ideas could not be confiscated. The French confiscated books. They banned meetings. They punished discussion. What they could not confiscate was memory. Men who had studied law, philosophy, economics, and history shared what they knew with those who had never held a textbook. Lessons were reconstructed from fragments. A chapter recalled from memory. A poem remembered line by line. A political theory reduced to a conversation whispered at night. Knowledge traveled cell to cell, not on paper, but through people. In a place built to erase thought, thinking became an act of resistance. Time as a weapon reversed. The French used time to break prisoners. Endless days. Repetitive labor. Monotony designed to exhaust the mind. The prisoners reversed this weapon. They organized time. Study hours. Discussion periods. Moments of silence. Routine created stability. Stability preserved sanity. What the guards saw as idleness was in reality preparation. Learning without teachers, teaching without classrooms. There were no blackboards, no desks, no official instructors. Yet Con Dao produced some of the most disciplined political thinkers of its era. Leadership emerged organically. Those who knew more taught more. Those who endured more protected others. Those who spoke less often spoke with greater weight. This was education stripped of credentials. Only one qualification mattered: commitment. Ideology under pressure. Outside prison walls, ideology can remain abstract. Inside Con Dao, it was tested daily. Every idea had to answer a single question. Does it help us survive and stay human? Empty slogans disappeared quickly. Only principles that could withstand hunger, pain, and fear survived. This pressure refined belief. Prisoners learned. Discipline over emotion. Strategy over impulse. Collective survival over individual escape. Revolution stopped being theory. It became practice. The making of future leaders. Many prisoners entered Con Dao as activists. They left as leaders. Not because the prison elevated them, but because it exposed character under extreme conditions. In Con Dao, leadership meant protection, not authority. Respect was earned through sacrifice. Trust was built through consistency. These lessons would later shape movements far beyond the island. The French believed they were isolating dangerous individuals. Instead, they were concentrating experience. Moral resistance. Not all resistance was physical or political. Some of it was moral. Prisoners maintained codes. Refusing to betray others under torture. Caring for the sick even when food was scarce. Preserving rituals of respect and dignity. These acts had no immediate reward. Their value lay in one thing only. They proved the system had failed to dehumanize its victims. A prison that outlived its purpose. Over time, Con Dao began to contradict its own purpose. A prison meant to end resistance had become the place where it matured. The island produced disciplined thinkers, hardened organizers, individuals immune to intimidation. By the time many prisoners were released or transferred, they carried with them something stronger than anger. They carried clarity. Con Dao was never meant to teach, yet it became a school, not of comfort, not of theory, but of endurance, discipline, and purpose. The French built Con Dao to control the future. Instead, it helped shape it. Because once people learn how to survive hell, they are no longer afraid of anything else. The legacy of hell on earth. Every prison leaves traces. Some leave scars on the body. Others leave marks on history. Con Dao left both. When the GATES finally opened. For decades, Con Dao existed beyond public scrutiny. An island far from cities. A prison hidden behind waves and silence. But no system built on cruelty remains invisible forever. As colonial rule weakened, as war shifted the balance of power, the gates of Con Dao slowly opened. Men emerged thinner, older, marked by disease, scars, and memories that would never fade. Yet they did not emerge broken. They emerged tempered. The men who walked out. Many former prisoners carried Con Dao with them for the rest of their lives. Not as hatred, not as vengeance, but as memory and responsibility. They had seen the limits of oppression. They had learned what fear could and could not do. They had survived a system designed to erase them. When these men later stood in leadership roles, they did not speak of theory alone. They spoke from experience. They had already faced the worst a system could impose. Everything else felt survivable. The collapse of moral authority. Con Dao did more than brutalize prisoners. It quietly undermined the legitimacy of colonial rule itself. A system that relies on tiger cages, cannot claim civilization, a power that governs through starvation, cannot claim moral authority. By the time the world began to fully understand what Con Dao was, the damage was irreversible. The prison stood as evidence, not of strength, but of desperation. Memory as a form of justice. Today, Con Dao no longer functions as a prison. Its cells stand silent. Its walls are weathered. But silence does not mean forgetting. Every preserved cell, every rusted shackle, every narrow corridor is a record, not of abstract numbers, but of individual lives once confined there. Memory became what punishment could not destroy, what Con Dao ultimately proved. Con Dao was designed with a clear objective: to permanently remove resistance from history. It failed. Instead, it revealed something uncomfortable for those in power: that violence has limits, that fear expires, that systems built solely on control eventually collapse under their own weight. The prison demonstrated a truth repeated throughout history. You can imprison bodies. You cannot permanently imprison belief. Hell as a turning point. For the French colonial system, Con Dao was meant to be an endpoint. For Vietnam's revolutionary movement, it became a crucible, a place where ideology hardened, where leadership matured, where commitment was tested beyond theory. Hell paradoxically became a turning point, the final image. Stand on Con Dao today, and you hear waves. The same waves that once carried prisoners away from the mainland. The same waves that swallowed names and stories. But beneath that calm surface lies a truth history cannot erase. This island was meant to make resistance disappear. Instead, it became proof that even in the most carefully engineered hell, the human spirit can remain ungovernable. Con Dao was not just a prison. It was a message. A message sent by power to silence dissent. History answered back. Not with noise. Not with spectacle. But with endurance.